Hey guys, John here. Today we're going to focus on some longer sound design and we're going to concentrate on pads today and a really interesting concept that I've been using. So, I made a patch called Cosmic Distance and it sounds a little something like this. And we get that nice reverb tail, that shimmer in there, which is kind of nice. And then I thought, let's refine this just a little bit more, add a couple more things. And so we ended up with Cosmic Distance version 2, which is this guy. Now this one adds, as you probably noticed, a filter on the filter on the macro, an arp on the macro, and as well as a sub. So the sub, as this one is saved, is kind of subtle. It's not really supposed to be too overpowering, which is also one of the reasons why it's on a macro. But we can crank this up if you want a little bit more oomph on the bottom end. Okay, so it's nice and subtle and calm and lush and all that stuff. So this one's kind of broken up into a couple different pieces. We have our main pad element, which this squiggly waveform, we'll get to that in just a little while. And then we have our sub here, and then we have our arp as well. Now, this sub is kind of interesting because we see it's a saw wave, but it's actually this right here, which we're going to get into as well. And then we have some interesting stuff on the voicing tab here. Some low voices. We're going to be on the endless sub mode. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. We're going to rebuild it. Probably not exactly the exact same, but just the kind of main concept, because the way that this is supposed to, this patch is made is that it revolves around this first oscillator called pad. And if we solo this guy, that's just two notes right there. And we hear that change, that motion, that movement. It's not just a droning sound that just sounds the exact same, because that gets kind of boring. And that's kind of the whole concept of pads, is change over time. Once you hold down a chord, it's supposed to be a slower thing, and the sound's kind of supposed to just do its own thing and move, come in and come out and change a lot of things somewhat slowly. So that's the kind of concept behind that. So with that being said, let's go to menu and initialize, and then let's kind of make something in the same ballpark as that. So we have a saw wave. So the first thing that I kind of like doing for this type of pad is maybe let's bring our attack to like maybe almost 3 seconds. Maybe a little bit of curve there. Some release. And drop our sustain down a little bit, maybe give some more decay. Okay, so we have that kind of basic. I mean, we might come back to this and kind of adjust things a little bit, but so for now, we're here on the editor page, and we can go down here to bin. And the cool part is we can go to random quite a few times. And here it's kind of just up to you which kind of waveform you think sounds best. I kind of went with something that was not too low endy, but also had some nice harmonic content to it. So that might be a little bit too low end. Okay, that might be kind of cool. Something like that. So we have this waveform with all these different changes here. Now we can add some unison to this guy. Maybe fatten it up with 7 voices and spread it over 2 octaves. So now we kind of get that rich context, but notice if we hit these 2 notes again, it's going to start to sound a little bit boring because it's just repeating the same waveform. And that makes it really, really less interesting. So the cool part is let's move this thing around. So let's see this end sweep down over here. So we can move that around. If we double click this guy, let's move this with an LFO and let's drag and drop this guy on here and maybe give it some depth like this. Okay, so obviously that's a little bit too fast. Maybe a little bit too much. So subtlety is kind of the key here. So we have this kind of moving, and what we should probably do is say, we want this to be moving, but not in such a repetitive pattern and also not so fast. So let's take it off tempo and just kind of slow this down a little bit. And also change it. We don't want this to re-trigger for the first MIDI note. Let's just do it free, so it's kind of just always moving. Okay, so that's kind of a cool shape motion, but the repetitiveness of this sine wave can get kind of boring. So if we right click, we can maybe go to this random LFO here. So we have that. So that's one of the first things that we can change. And then we have this flip here. Now, it's kind of cool if we start moving this as well with this LFO, it's going to kind of come in with some lows. It's going to take it away. It's going to start changing it also on a harmonic basis. So if we put this maybe here somewhat in the middle and then use the same LFO to modulate this as well. We kind of have something like that. And next we have this V strength and V speed. So we can start moving these 2 up here, and now it's going to start to move by itself, as you can see this waveform right over here. Let me slow down that attack just a little bit. And maybe some more release on this guy as well. So we have something kind of like that, which might be kind of interesting. And maybe this spread, which I like as well, turn this to the left a little bit. So we're going to have kind of random where it's going throughout the stereo field. Okay, so that's pretty decent for now. And even if we start moving the filter around, that might be kind of nice. So maybe a subtle motion of that filter kind of just moving back and forth by itself, which will also control on a macro. So we can add another LFO. Let's drag and drop on this guy. And let's give it some depth here, but I don't want this going below too much. So what I'm going to do is just turn this all the way to the right. So we're just basically getting a unipolar LFO. But again, obviously too fast to slow this down. And again, we don't want this to be triggered here at the first MIDI note. Let's go to free. So it's just doing its thing. We kind of just hop on whenever we want to. Maybe I probably want a triangle. That might be a little bit smoother for this. And then, so let's go here's the lowest we want it to be. Kind of tucked in and muffled. And then we're going to get macro 1, drag and drop this guy here. And then we can either use the flag or the mod matrix and turn this all the way to the right and see how much we want to open this up at our maximum place. And remember, we can have a little wiggle room right here because that LFO is almost also moving it back and forth. So we don't need to go all the way to the max if we don't want to. Just something to think about. And let's double click and label this as filter. maybe a little bit of resonance. %, maybe. Don't go too much. Okay, so we have our waveform, we have the filter setup, we have a little bit of automation on the or modulation on the filter, and also our macro. So what else can we hit this with? Next thing I kind of maybe want to do is do some maybe effects or something like that. That might be kind of interesting. So on this first one, what I kind of liked hitting it with was this vintage chorus, and the default preset sounds lovely. So and especially with pads, you always want to keep playing it. Every time you add something or change something, you just always play it throughout while you're making it. See, now that I'm kind of thinking maybe this waveform here is moving a little too fast, so we can bring down the V strength or the V speed a little bit, just to slow it down a bit. Okay, that's kind of nice. Let's play around with the mix here. All right, I'm going to start to cry here in a little bit. Okay, so next up, we want to probably add maybe a little bit of delay, which sometimes we think the order, like, which order do we want to go with? We can always swap those around, so let's add a delay. And maybe a quarter note might be okay for now. Let's take out some of that out of the lows. Increasing our feedback and mix. And what's better than one delay is adding another delay. Now, we can keep it with ping pong. We can change the time. Something that might be kind of interesting as well if you haven't done this here, going to pattern and selecting some of these different times here, they can always make the delay sound a little bit more interesting. So let's go for 4 or 4 to 5, and then also remove this low end as well, and maybe a little high end too. Oh man, I'm like ascending into heaven, it sounds like. This is okay. This is going well so far. Okay, so we have our chorus, 2 delays, and the next thing, we need to add some reverb to this guy. So one thing that's cool about this root reverb is the type here, change it from stage to abyss. This algorithm is just beautiful. So we have this guy, and also let's add some shimmer. Let's go all the way 100%, and an octave is perfect. Oh man, that's beautiful. Okay, so this is probably okay for now. One thing I did add on the other patch was, if we move these kind of down just a little bit like that. So this second slot here, I was like, what does a multi-band distortion sound like this? I just brought up some of the highs and mids, and it kind of made it sound really nice. Okay, that's kind of beautiful. So now when I was thinking, I was kind of at this same spot of the last patch. I was like, okay, what else could we add to this aside from bass or something like that? Maybe some interesting kind of art that kind of maybe comes in and out depending on where our macro is, and how do we want to exactly create this ARP? Do we want the traditional ARP, route it to the ARP and kind of hold down a chord and it's just going to repeat those notes? Do we want to use the quantize in one of our oscillators to set it up that way? So there's different versions of that you can do. So for the first one, let's just kind of start off and start doing that. So let's add a new oscillator, and we can also run it through this as well. We'll see how that sounds through this stack. If we don't like it, we can always add a new effect stack and kind of process it separately. However, I think we might be okay with most of the things. I did put it on a different filter for the last one, but it might be okay for the first. So let's kind of see where that goes. We might need it on a different amp though. So let's add the amp and maybe let's copy this setting and paste it to this guy, just in case if we want to do some subtle changes. So oscillator 1, let's rename this as just pad. That might be here. Then oscillator 2, double click, and let's call this one arp and see what comes out here. Okay, so let's solo this guy. So maybe a saw wave wasn't the right waveform for that. So maybe we can go to a square. And maybe, okay, now that I'm listening to this, maybe we should do another effect stack. So let's go plus here and add effects 1. Let's change it to 2. And then we change our amp here, amp 2. Let's have this come in maybe a little bit earlier. And then fade out a little bit quicker. And then turn on an ARP, maybe bring down the level a bit. So that's going to be our ARP so far. Now our ARP, let's change this maybe to 1/8 because it's kind of fast. It would be kind of like this in the mix. So yeah, that amp is too slow. And then maybe bring some octaves, put us some mix here. And random's kind of nice as well, like we're talking about before, where it's kind of going back and forth through the stereo field. And then for our ARP, maybe we can do 2 octaves. And I think maybe another filter might be kind of appropriate for that. So filter 2. That might be kind of interesting. Now for this ARP, we really don't need any low end almost at all. So this FX2, we can start and hit this with an EQ, open this guy up, change this guy probably to a high pass, and just kind of cut a lot of that low out. And maybe on these voices, we can maybe do it over 2 octaves and maybe add some more of those voices. And then for the ARP, maybe the mode, we can change these out. Maybe alternate might be nice. Or maybe down. Okay, so we have that so far. Let's solo this guy again. So maybe we want some delays to kind of wash this out a little bit. Shouldn't be the main focus of the patch. It should be this kind of subtle ARP kind of going around, moving around, doing its own thing. So a thing I like to do as well, so we're going to do 1/8. And then add another delay. This one's going to be a quarter note. Actually, you know what? We can actually do a quarter note dotted. That might be interesting too. And then we'll add one more delay. And again, let's use the pattern mode and maybe go for a 3/4. So there's still a little too many lows. Let's bring this up a little bit higher here. That might be kind of nice. And then we're going to go and add another reverb here. And let's change this to Abyss again, and then also full shimmer, and then bring down the decay. We don't need it that long, because the other tail is pretty long. It's carrying it as well, and this one also fades out a little bit quicker. And we'll see how the mix sounds. Okay, so we have something kind of there. That's kind of cool. And then if we unsolo that... So the last time I made this type of patch here, remember I said I had two filters. So this first filter is attached to this macro here on this filter one, but the second filter of the ARP is not. So this is kind of a point where you have to think, do I want this first macro filter knob to control both of those filters? We totally can do that. So a way to do that is kind of slow this ARP and make it to like almost where we want it to be, as dark as we want it to be. Maybe something like that. And then we're going to grab the same macro here, drag and drop this to this filter, and then let's bring this all the way to the top, and then let's see how much we want of that. That might be enough, but again, listen to it inside this mix here. That should be okay, because the main pad is really carrying a lot of that high frequency content, and it's nice as we use the macro, we also hear that the ARP gets darkened as well via the second filter. So I think we're okay there. We can always adjust things if we need to. What we should do though is let's put this ARP on a macro. So this volume, let's bring this all the way down, drag our macro 2 to the level, and then let's turn this all the way up, and let's just type in ARP, something like that. And also play this here. So generally this would be too loud for me with this ARP, but at the maximum value, I kind of always push it a little bit more, just so you have the room to do so. Okay, so we have something here so far, 2 effect stacks, 2 oscillators, 2 filters, and 2 macros. Wow, that's interesting. A lot of 2s here. Okay, so now maybe we want some low end to this. Now, if that's the case, what we need to do is we need to go to this pad and say, we're going to cut some of the low end here because we're going to have something else to cover that, because we don't want a lot of that weird phasey stuff at the bottom. So on our first effect stack here, we don't really have an EQ, so let's kind of bring these down here. And then the first thing, let's hit it with an EQ and kind of just carve out its own space for it. So let's solo it, and let's take a listen here. And what I'm doing, this little subtle move here, is kind of just bringing the filter all the way down, so we just hear kind of the low end stuff, and making sure there's not really some mud down there. Okay, so that's cool. All right, so now we have the pad, the ARP. So let's say maybe we want to do something with the bass. So let's double click this and put either bass or sub. Sub might be fine. And let's solo it. Now, we don't really want this sub going through any of these effects, so we're going to need a third one. So out effects 3, and then For the amp, let's see how that goes for now. Right now it's defaulted to amp 1, which is the same one that the pad is on, so that might be okay. But again, we're going to have to listen to that there. For the filter, we'll see. We'll see what happens there. Okay, so we have our saw for this guy here. Now, if we did something like this here, we're going to have a sine, and that can be okay. But sometimes it can be a little bit too pure, so maybe just adding a couple extra harmonics might make it sound a little bit nicer. I might want to do an amp 3 now that I'm thinking about it. So let's copy the first one. Let's paste it here, and let's route this to amp 3, and maybe have this come in just a little bit earlier. And let's see what a little bit of multi-band distortion might sound like. And let's go here to this endless sub switch. So that might sound kind of nice with everything together. So let's play everything together. And for this bass, what I kind of maybe want to do is in our pitch here, maybe I'm going to add a second one and send this to pitch 2. And then for our mode, maybe mono legato might be interesting. That might be kind of cool. See how that sounds. Maybe something like that might be kind of nice as well. And then let's drop a compressor down here just to keep it level the whole time. So we're going to do something like 8 to 1. Keep it really like that. Okay, so that might be kind of a cool low end there. Now for this guy, I don't really want to change this level. I kind of want to control that via this output gain on the compressor, something I kind of personally like doing. So let's bring that down. And the third macro is going here on the output gain. And let's label this as a sub. Bring this up and decide how much we want. So that might be kind of cool, and maybe bring this down a little bit. That might be much. So now something to think about. So if we hit notes higher up, even though we're on endless sub, we still have that low end, that sub on those higher notes. So what we could do is go down to our zones, and let's say like maybe here, I don't really want it to play past that or even there. So something like this, we don't hear the sub. So only once we play in the key zone, that's going to make it feel a little bit better there. So yeah, so that's our sub right here. We're out of effects these, so we're hitting a little bit of multiband distortion, compressor, nothing too crazy. Now, if this sounds a little bit like too many harmonics, you can always go into the editor and maybe drop this one out and just have 2 or bring that one down a little bit so it's more sine wavy. It really depends on the tonality of the sub that you want. And maybe for the sub here, we're going to amp 3. So this release is too quick for me. It kind of just goes out too far away. So let's bring that out a little bit more, because I feel like the low end should just kind of slowly decay or release technically. So yeah, let's try that here. Yeah, that feels better. Maybe, so now that I'm thinking, looking at, so amp 1, this one comes in kind of slow, the bass is a little bit faster. Maybe we could slow down the bass just a bit here. Because what are we at here? We're at like almost a little over 3 seconds. This guy, we can go closer to that. Okay, so basically all these 3 parts are made together. So now there's maybe some master effects that we might want to add. So in the master effects, we have a default EQ here. So let's turn this guy on and maybe just do some small little enhancements to really make the patch shine. So we're going to have something like that, and maybe at the end, maybe we want to maybe compress everything just a little bit more, we can. Give some final output here if we want to. Okay, so for the most part, I'd probably call this one done or close to done. What you can also do if you want to go a little bit the extra mile, you can maybe add another page of macros and put the different effects for the different oscillators if you want to. You know, maybe less reverb, more reverb, kind of things like that if you're feeling so accustomed to. Or you can even do a switch for the sub, turning on and off with the switches down here. That can be kind of nice. And before we let you go, the reason that I think is always helpful to put a sub on a macro, especially with a pad like this, is one, we don't really know how much low end we're going to need. So it's kind of nice to have a control if we went a little bit more or a little bit less. And it's also nice that maybe in the track that we're using this in, we already have huge low end. There's already a bass playing and we kind of just want the texture of the pad. So in that sense, we would just turn our sub all the way down. And we kind of have just a little bit of low mids or somewhat mids. Because even down here in the lower register, there's not really too much low end, because remember, we're cutting a lot of that out with this first EQ, which is the FX1, which is where our pad is getting routed to, right over here. But if we want low end, there it is. And there you have it. That's a way to make the cosmic distance. I suppose this is going to be version 3 now, so yeah, if you made it all the way to the end, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you learned something. I know this one is a little bit longer, but pads, there's a lot to do with it and a lot of decisions and things that we need to make a cool sounding pad with some helpful controls down over here. So again, thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.